Hello, folks. I'm Josh McGee, and welcome to another episode of the Gateway to Soccer Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I hope everybody had a great weekend. I hope everyone found some way to enjoy the Super Bowl, but now it is time to switch gears once again to soccer. A lot of good soccer to recap, and there's a lot of great soccer coming up on the horizon. As far as the home studio goes, a little holiday flair for Valentine's Day coming up this weekend. Got my old high school pink warm-up behind me. Kind of contrasts nicely with the city red right above it. Maybe they're the same color. You be the judge. Over here on my other shoulder, the last Chelsea jersey that I purchased, an OG Christian Pulisic number 22 Chelsea home jersey. Of course, that reign was short-lived. Pulisic now wears the number 10. Maybe he should go back to 22. Obviously, he's been struggling a little bit this season, but still, nice collector's item from his first season in Chelsea blue. But again, very excited for this week's episode. Got a great guest, recurring guest, back on the show. But I want to start off talking about a specific team right now that is dominating in their league, and it actually ties in nicely to what happened over the weekend with the Super Bowl. We're coming off another Super Bowl where Tom Brady led the winning team. It's usually been with the Patriots. This time it was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, leading them to victory over the Kansas City Chiefs in dominating fashion. It was Brady's 7th Super Bowl win of his Hall of Fame, soon-to-be Hall of Fame career. Listen, I'm not a Tom Brady fan. It goes all the way back to when the Patriots originally beat the Rams. There might have been some nefarious purposes as to how they were able to do that. Of course, Spygate and Deflategate come out over the years. And yeah, just all of those possible calls that Brady got over his career just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, the way that he did it, the way he carried himself. I'm not a huge Tom Brady fan. I will admit that. But I will also admit that I respect what he's been able to do over the totality of his career. All of those wins, all of those Super Bowls, and of course being able to do this last one when he is basically approaching his mid-40s, it's quite an accomplishment. I respect Tom Brady. I respect his career, and I don't let my dislike of him get in the way of acknowledging the fact that he's been one of the greatest of all time to play in the NFL. I have a somewhat similar feeling towards Manchester City. I'm not a fan of their ownership group, the way they do things, especially away from football. I haven't liked that over the years. They've bought so many different players. They've basically skirted around financial fair play rules, but still, they've played beautiful football over the years, and they've been able to achieve sustained success with a continuing change in circumstances. That's basically the similarity between Tom Brady and Manchester City. You may not like how they're doing it, but you can't deny the fact that they've been doing it well for a very long time. When you look back over what Man City have been able to accomplish over the past few years, especially in the EPL, you'll see that they've had many history-making type teams. You think about their first title win when they won it on the final day in dramatic fashion over Manchester United. Of course, then a few seasons ago, you think about the record-breaking 100-point season team and what they were able to accomplish in dominating fashion. But the main point I want to make in this segment today is what they are currently doing here in the 2020-2021 season could be argued could be their most impressive season if they're able to finish things off here in May. Man City are currently on a 15-match winning streak across all competitions, which is a brand new English top-flight record. In 10 of those matches, they've been able to keep a clean sheet. And of course, this past Sunday, their 14th win in that streak was the loudest when they beat the reigning champions Liverpool 4-1 at Anfield. It's been amazing to watch City during this run. They've either been crushing teams or they've been finding ways to win close games and keep teams off the scoreboards. And like I said, I think this could potentially be their most impressive season if they're able to finish things up in the English Premier League. Of course, you go back and you especially think about the 100-point season and the record-breaking season that they were able to have. But you have to look at this year's circumstances with the pandemic. It could be argued that City actually have had the worst luck when it comes to injuries and things to do with the pandemic. Of course, it started out with a couple of their players testing positive, a couple of really important players, their goalkeeper, Ederson, the right back, Kyle Walker, who have been fixtures in the side over the past few seasons, were out for a few matches due to COVID. Then you look at the injuries. It started with Aymeric Laporte, who used to be the center back, who couldn't be left out of the starting 11. He was one of the first guys on the team sheet for Pep Guardiola over the past few years. He was out for a long time due to injury. He's only recently come back, but he can't even get in the side right now because of what City have been able to do. You think about Sergio Aguero, one of the first, signings of this brand new Manchester City era. I think he's only appeared in 5 EPL matches this season. He's been basically hurt for the whole year. he hasn't been a big part of what they've been doing. And then once again, Kevin De Bruyne just a few weeks ago suffered a long-term injury. He's going to be back here at the end of the month, but it's once again another long-term layoff for him, their most important playmaker, due to injury. If you told me that by February, City's leading goal scorer would be İlkay Gündoğan, I would have said they'd be out of the top 4. Because again, we haven't seen him in terms of goal scoring form like this since he was at Borussia Dortmund. But he's their leading goal scorer in the EPL. Raheem Sterling is right behind him, but he only has 8 at this point. City have been able to get things done on the offensive end without some of their best playmakers, without some of their best scorers, and they've been getting it from all over the place, basically. I mean, Phil Foden has really grown into himself, has become almost a mainstay in the starting 11 for City over the past couple of years, but he's really grown and developed for this season. But of course, the big thing with City this season has to be their defense. It lost them the title last year. It is now their strength for this team this season. That, of course, is thanks in large part to Ruben Dias, who they brought in just before the end of the summer deadline. It was kind of almost like a panic buy for City because they knew they were going to need another center back. That was when Laporte went down, and he has been a godsend. He's probably been the signing of the year, really. He has really fortified that defense back there. You can also credit the rebirth of John Stones. Maybe having a different partner here in Diaz has really helped him kind of refine his game. Also, João Cancelo on the outside, being able to play left or right back. He's been incredibly important to City. But again, like I said, 15-match winning streak, but to keep a clean sheet in 10 of those, that is extremely impressive. They've been extremely dominant back there. We always think about offense when it comes to City. They're still doing well there, but it's been their defense that has truly carried them through this streak and has rocketed them back up to the top of the table. Yeah, it's only a 5-point lead headed into this weekend, but it feels like City are on the cusp of taking this title already in the month of February. Completely dominant run. Again, Pep Guardiola working behind the scenes. Much like Tom Brady, he has been successful in wherever he has gone, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, and now with Manchester City. Again, they may not break records this year, but what they've been able to do, go through the pandemic, go through these injuries. Yeah, you can go ahead and claim that, oh, City have the purse strings. They can go out and buy whoever they want. Of course, they're going to have a deep team, but they're not buying guys that normal, average soccer fans have heard of. Nobody heard of Ruben Dias before he joined up with City. Nobody heard of Rodri. Rodri has basically displaced Fernandinho, who was another guy like Laporte, who was always in the starting 11 for City. Now it's Rodri who's taken up that role in the holding midfield spot and has been dominant there. They're buying guys off the map to help out with their club. Ferran Torres, young Spanish player who maybe people didn't heard of, one of their top scorers in the Champions League this season. Of course, Phil Foden, a youngster breaking into the side full of big-time players and holding his own there. So again, City have found ways to adjust to the injuries, to the pandemic, and fight through the season. They got off to a slow start, but now they are just on a completely other level to the rest of the teams in the EPL. Like I said, title race feels like it's on a tipping point. That show against Liverpool and what they were able to do, obviously, Alisson and Liverpool helped them out a little bit, but still, it was a dominated win, a stamp on what they've been doing over the past few weeks. And again, like I said, it's hard not to be impressed, even if you don't like what they're doing. It's like Vince Vaughn's character in Anchorman, right? I may not like you, but man, do I respect you. And that's kind of what I see right now in City, how they've been able to fight through these different obstacles and get to this point, have a record-breaking streak that they've been able to accomplish right now. It's been a joy to watch, and we'll have to see if they'll be able to finish it off here in May with another English Premier League title. So City will actually come up again here in a few moments as I transition over to one of my favorite topics in soccer. Everyone always gets excited for the month of February. Of course, that has a lot to do with Valentine's Day, celebrating that holiday with your loved ones. That's all fine and good. What I get excited about when the calendar changes to the month of February has to be the return of the Champions League. We're at the round of 16 knockout stage in the biggest club tournament in the world. A lot of great matchups starting next week. I'm going to go through them all here for you all with a little bit of a preview, and I'm going to go through them in the order of which they are scheduled. And man, what a great way to start off the schedule next week on Tuesday, Barcelona versus PSG. This will be the first time the clubs match up in the Champions League since that dramatic 6-1 comeback by Barcelona at the Camp Nou in 2017, where they overturned a 4-goal deficit by PSG. Neymar was on Barcelona at the time. And of course, since then, he has joined up with PSG. However, he will not feature at least for this first cup tie. Neymar picked up an abductor injury this past Wednesday in a cup match for PSG in midweek, and he's been ruled out up to 4 weeks, which of course rules him out for this first matchup, the first tie between Barcelona and PSG. And it's going to be really tough for him to get to full fitness for the second tie coming up in March. That, of course, is a huge factor. Neymar is basically the best all-round type player for PSG. PSG are also going to be without Angel Di Maria for this first match versus Barcelona. But still, at the end of the day, what it's going to come down to is, can PSG exploit Barcelona's inconsistencies right now? We've seen across multiple different competitions that you don't know which Barcelona team is going to show up on its day, especially defensively. They have really struggled to contain lower-level clubs in Spain on that end of the pitch. Can PSG exploit that even without Neymar and Di Maria in this first matchup? Barcelona have looked great in the Champions League. It's really the only competition that they have looked pretty much perfect in. Can they keep that run of form? Will they be able to just flick the switch and figure things out from there? Of course, Neymar being out for this first matchup and potentially the return leg, got to give the edge to Barcelona in this matchup as of right now. They still got Lionel Messi, and they are able to just find the form that they've had in the Champions League. I think they'll have enough to beat PSG. It's going to depend upon Neymar's health and if the right Barcelona team shows up. But that Neymar injury just cast a lot of doubt on what PSG will be able to do against Barcelona. Next up, RB Leipzig versus Liverpool. This will be one of 3 matches played at a neutral site due to the fact that the home country for this tie have strict travel restrictions for the UK right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This match will be played in Budapest, but still, it should be a very entertaining match still. RB Leipzig, they've been able to right the ship in the Bundesliga over the past few weeks. They're a solid team. We saw last year with their deep Champions League run that they can play with the big boys. They're going up against Liverpool. We've seen over the past few weeks the struggles that Liverpool have had, especially in the Premier League, when it comes to scoring goals. They've got the talent, but they are in just a huge rut right now. Can they find their goal-scoring form? If their defense is still not up to snuff against a team like Leipzig, they're going to need to be able to score a lot of goals. So Mo Salah, Sadio Mane, going to have to figure things out to go up against this Leipzig defense and keep them in these matches if the defense is still having problems. If they figured it out a little bit on that end, I still would favor Liverpool in this matchup, especially if they are able to get that second tie at Anfield. But again, Leipzig, just as recently as last year, and we've seen it a little bit in the Bundesliga this year, they can play with the big boys. Even if they've sold off some of their players over the past few seasons, they still got a ton of talent there. So I think this will be a pretty close tie. I favor Liverpool slightly still, even with the struggles because of the guys that they've had. But this one should be very, very interesting. Up next, FC Porto versus Juventus. A little bit of an interesting tie here. These two clubs last met in the Champions League in 2017. Juventus won 3-0 on aggregate in the round of 16. Again, kind of a cool story. Cristiano Ronaldo, Portugal's own, going up against the premier club from that country. I think this is a pretty easy pick. Definitely think Juventus is heavily favored in this matchup. They just can't overlook Porto. Porto always make it to this point in the Champions League. They're a very talented club still with a lot of interesting and dynamic offensive players. Juventus's defense has been solid. They just need to keep that up. And of course, right now, Ronaldo has been on quite some goal-scoring form. Great playmaker as well. I just think Juventus have a little too much here for Porto to handle. But still, again, you got to come in with the right mentality. You got to get through this professionally and figure this out. I think Juventus should be able to do that here in the round of 16. Moving on to Sevilla FC versus Borussia Dortmund. A couple of underdog challengers in their respective leagues are going to go head-to-head for the first time since in 2010 in the Europa League. Earmark this matchup for a lot of goals. The way that Dortmund play defense, but also the firepower that they have on offense, this should have a lot of exciting offensive play. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to whether Sevilla can stop Erling Haaland and Jadon Sancho. Those two guys, again, some of the best players in all of Europe. Haaland has once again returned to full health and is starting to put in the goals once again. That's why I like them in this matchup. I think it's a little too much for Sevilla to handle. Of course, they just bought Alejandro Gomez. They got a couple of informed players. I think that he can stay with Dortmund for a little bit, but still, at the end of the day, Haaland is the best player on the pitch in this matchup. I think he's going to put in at least a couple of goals here across the two ties, and I think he's going to lead Dortmund to the next round of the Champions League. Up next, a matchup I'll be paying particularly close attention to, Atletico Madrid versus Chelsea. Again, another one of these matches that has been moved to a neutral site. I believe this first match will be played in Bucharest. These two clubs last matched up in the Champions League in 2017 in the group stage, which involved that really dynamic Chelsea comeback, Michy Batshuayi scoring in stoppage time to take the winner there in Spain. I think this is going to be a defensive slugfest. Obviously, we know Atletico are an outstanding defensive club under Diego Simeone. And Chelsea, over the past few weeks, since the managerial change with Thomas Tuchel, they've been pretty impressive defensively as well. And I also say that because Chelsea, though, despite the improvements on the defensive end and somewhat on the offensive end, they're still struggling to score goals. So against a really great defense in Atletico, it's tough for me to favor Chelsea right now in this matchup. You also look at what Madrid's doing on the offensive end. Luis Suarez still showing that he's a great, great striker for that club. Got to favor Atletico at this moment right now because I think their defense will be able to keep Chelsea out of the back of the net. And at the end of the day, I like their offense a little bit more to poach at least 1 or 2 goals across a couple of ties to take things to the next round. But Chelsea have the pedigree. They have the players. Can they put it all together? Can they continue to improve under Tuchel, who's got a lot of experience in the Champions League? I think this one will be pretty close, but right now I would still favor the team from Spain. Up next, probably the biggest discrepancy between two clubs in a matchup in the round of 16. You've got Lazio from Serie A taking on the holders, the reigning champions, Bayern Munich. Munich still on great form. It's just going to be incredibly tough for Lazio to contain them, to keep them off the scoreboard, because that's what they're going to do. They're not going to outscore Bayern Munich. They're not going to win in a shootout. Lazio are still a great offensive team, but against Bayern Munich, it's just a completely different animal. The really big thing I'm looking forward to in this matchup is a matchup of two of the best strikers in Europe, Robert Lewandowski, of course, for Bayern Munich, and Ciro Immobile for Lazio. Great goal-scoring records throughout their entirety of their careers. Immobile has really picked things up over the past couple of seasons. So I like him still to get on the scoreboard at least once in this tie, but I think Lewandowski will be the leading scorer across both clubs, and he will successfully lead Bayern Munich to the next round. Moving on quickly to what I think is one of the more interesting ties in the round of 16, Atalanta versus Real Madrid. Madrid come in extremely shorthanded. They've suffered some big injury blows over the past couple weeks. You had Sergio Ramos have surgery on a damaged meniscus, and of course, Eden Hazard ruled out up to 4 to 6 weeks, I believe, with a long-term injury as well. This is going to be a huge test for Zinedine Zidane to coach up Madrid to take on, once again, another plucky underdog who played great offensive ball in Atalanta. Yes, they sold Alejandro Gomez, but they still have a couple of great players on that side. Luis Muriel, Julian Zapata, great goal scorers. Can Madrid right the wrongs of what happened to them versus Ajax? Can they keep Atalanta off the board? And can they find a way to create some offense, of course, even without some of their better players on the pitch? You still got to favor Madrid, the pedigree, the players, the coach, but this, again, has me seeing deja vu all over again. Atalanta definitely have the players and the offensive firepower to stick with Madrid. Because of that injury, Sergio Ramos, they're always just a completely different defensive team without him. So I think this tie will be close. Favor Madrid still, but definitely one to watch out for here in the round of 16. And lastly, we got Borussia Mönchengladbach taking on Manchester City, the third match that will be played at a neutral site, much like the Liverpool match. This one will be played in Budapest. These two clubs last met, I believe, in 2016 in the Champions League group stage. Borussia Mönchengladbach, they've got a lot of firepower. They're a good goal-scoring club, but much like the Lazio-Bayern Munich matchup, they're not going to be able to outscore Manchester City. Defense is too good. I expect City to comfortably move on to the next round. Even if they're just a little bit off their game, they've got the firepower as well on the offensive end. Some of their players have especially succeeded, like Ferran Torres in the Champions League. They're just on a different level right now. They're on par with the likes of Bayern Munich right now across all of Europe and what they've been doing. So again, I think Mönchengladbach will get a goal or two, but still, I fully expect City to control this tie and move on to the next round of the Champions League. So those are all your matchups for these next coming weeks. Of course, the first tie will be coming up over the next couple weeks here in February, and then the second ties of these matchups will be played kind of close to the spring break period in March. A lot of entertaining matchups to look forward to, and I definitely expect to see some exciting games, exciting results, and hopefully, again, we'll be able to have all these in normal capacity with the pandemic going on. I know it's tough having some of these matches move to neutral sites, but still, the soccer should still be good and should be a thoroughly entertaining round of 16. So I'll get a little bit more into the Champions League later on in the show with my guests, but now I want to transition over to what is happening with soccer in America. Of course, I got to start with MLS, and after what seems like ages and ages of tense negotiations, multiple deadline extensions, we finally have a deal in place between MLS and the Players Association. They were able to ratify a brand new CBA agreement, and we will successfully have this upcoming 2021 season, at least avoid a work stoppage. Thank goodness. Both sides, again, wanted certain things. I believe they were able to get the main parts of what they wanted. For MLS, they wanted to extend this past CBA for another couple of seasons past the 2026 World Cup, which is important because it kind of blocks the players from asking for more during an important time for the league, an important time in soccer. The league were able to successfully block that and extend the CBA. And they were also able to freeze the salary cap, which is supposed to save the league a lot of money. As for the players, they needed relief badly right now, and they were able to win that. They will be paid their full salaries for 2021. There will be no concessions on that front like there were in 2020. All contracts through 2022 will be honored, and they were able to make some headway on free agency, allow certain players to enter that free agency period earlier on in their career. So a couple of small wins for either side. But again, the big thing is that we're going to have a season coming up here shortly. They also announced that the start of this upcoming season has been pushed back a couple weeks to April 17th. But still, again, they were able to get things done. I know it was ugly. The relationship is still not very good between the two sides, but they were able to come to agreement. We're going to have an upcoming season. Thank goodness for that. Hopefully, maybe in the future, we can find some way to do a better job between these two sides and work something out. It's not good for this league to continually be in tough and sometimes even unfair negotiations between the two sides. You want to keep this league growing. So it's important that we got this done. Hopefully in the future, it'll be done a little bit better. As far as the more fun news coming out of MLS, there was a huge signing from this past week from one of their clubs. FC Cincinnati announced the signing of striker Brenner from Sao Paulo for a near record in MLS transfer fee, at least in terms of additional add-ons. It could get up to what was the record-breaking signing in MLS history. Brenner has scored 22 goals in 44 appearances this season for Sao Paulo, 21 years old, great playmaker, great goal scorer. FC Cincinnati, they need all the help they can get. They've had a horrible start to their tenure in MLS, but now they could get a proven goal scorer here in Brenner. Excited to see what he can bring to the league. Another young, promising player coming from South America really could help the dynamic of this league and, again, really help bring FC Cincinnati out from the basement. So, again, impressive that they've put up basically a near record-breaking amount of money to bring him here to the U.S. Excited to see what he can accomplish here in MLS coming up this season. And lastly, we were provided an update on the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup. We are going to have that tournament here in 2021, but the field is going to be considerably smaller due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's only going to feature 24 clubs. In the first round, 16 clubs will be represented from the lower level leagues here in the U.S. It's going to feature 8 USL Championship clubs, 4 Open Division clubs, and 2 clubs each from USL League One and NISA. The 8 winners of those matchups will then move into the round of 16 and will be joined by 8 MLS clubs, which will be determined here at a later date. So at the very least, still getting a rendition of this tournament. Obviously, the likelihood of any magic coming from some of the lower level leagues, it's going to be much tougher with less teams involved, but still, it's important to have this type of tournament, one of the more historic tournaments here in the U.S. Always some exciting matchups, exciting results. You think about St. Louis FC's run a couple of years ago to the quarterfinal stage. It's important to have these types of tournaments to give these lower level clubs an opportunity to go up against the best that MLS has to offer. I'll be interested to see how they determine the clubs for this tournament, but still, we're getting a rendition of it, thankfully, here, even with the pandemic in 2021. Moving on to a couple of stories in women's soccer. Once again, I want to highlight that the SheBelieves Cup is right around the corner. The U.S. women's national team is set to begin play next Thursday versus Canada. They will then take on Brazil the following Sunday, and then they will wrap up play against Argentina a couple days later. Argentina actually replaced Japan in this tournament. Again, complications due to the pandemic, but still an incredibly strong field for the U.S. women's national team. I think what I'll do is, again, that first match kind of falls on a rough time in terms of taping the show. So I think what I'll do is recap all 3 matches in succession once those have wrapped up for that week's show. But again, it's an impressive roster that Vlatko Andonovski has put together for this tournament. Excited to see some of the old guard back in the fold. And of course, some of the younger players that have been successful over the past couple of matches for the national team continue to get some shine and some playing time and continue their development as well. So check that out. SheBelieves Cup, once again, returning here to the U.S. in 2021. The other story in women's soccer comes from the NWSL. They offered up their first COVID-19 update of the preseason. They've already gotten things underway on that front. The league conducted more than 600 tests for players and personnel last week and reported that only 5 came back positive. So that's a pretty decent start for the league. Remember, they're going to start playing in home markets this season with the Challenge Cup coming up here in a couple of months. And they're going to be offering up regular updates throughout the preseason and, of course, through the regular season. So the NWSL really handled things last year well with the pandemic. They're going to continue to do so, hopefully now, and still be as successful in home markets as they were with the bubble last season. So good for them offering up an update, and hopefully things continue to run smoothly over there. And lastly, just want to highlight a few transactions in the USL Championship from the past week or so. I want to start off with El Paso Locomotive FC announcing the signing of striker Luis Solanac. Solanac starred at rivals San Antonio FC last season, where he led the club with 8 goals. Solanac also has previous experience in MLS with the Chicago Fire and Colorado Rapids. So impressive signing there for El Paso, getting a guy from a rival club and a guy coming off a very impressive season with a lot of experience, a lot of goal-scoring pedigree. Excellent signing there for El Paso. Next up, Pittsburgh Riverhounds SC announced the signing of veteran center back Alex Dejean this week. Dejean has spent the last couple of seasons with Orlando City SC in MLS, where he's made 15 appearances for that club. So another veteran player joining a USL Championship club and joining a club like Pittsburgh, who've been very successful over the past few seasons, only strengthens their back line. And lastly, New Mexico United announced the signing of Jamaican international Brian Brown. Brown has 37 goals and 20 assists in the USL Championship over his career and has also appeared 9 times for the Jamaican national team. Excellent signing by New Mexico to bring in someone with that type of goal-scoring pedigree. Only adds to what they've been building over at that club over the past few seasons. Should lead to more success here in 2021. Now it's time to get into some St. Louis soccer news. A few of these stories I'm going to get a little bit more in depth with my guest, but I do want to highlight them here in this segment. Starting off with St. Louis City SC sporting director Lutz. He recently jumped on Grant Wahl's podcast to talk a little bit about tackling his new job. It was a great conversation, definitely something to go look up if you have the time, but a couple of key things of note. Lutz talked about that the club would like to hire a head coach sometime around early 2022, and that he'll definitely be looking at some U.S. candidates as well as European ones. He also talked about the growth of MLS, the embrace of signing younger players instead of the older players that have maybe a little bit past their prime, and how he hopes that St. Louis will adopt that same philosophy. That's exciting to hear, embracing the younger player movement, of course, embracing maybe developing players out of the academy as well. And it's exciting. We're finally getting a little bit of a timeline as to when City will be attacking some of these on-the-pitch type hires. So, again, it's not a firm deadline. I'm sure that's ideally what they would like to do, but it's still cool to kind of hear what their plans are, what he's thinking in terms of how the team is going to look on the pitch. So, again, great conversation, goes in depth about what his plans are, some of his stories. Definitely go look that up, but it's exciting to hear these developments coming out from St. Louis City SC. Next up, tough weekend for the Ambush as they suffered back-to-back home losses to the Ontario Fury, mostly because of a largely depleted roster. By the time the second match rolled around, the Ambush were without 12 players due to injury, sickness, or quarantine. It was also tough that those matches were basically within 24 hours of each other. Ambush will look to get back on track this weekend when they take on the rivals, the Kansas City Comets, in Kansas City. And then they'll have a little bit of a layoff with their next home match coming up on the 26th versus the San Diego Sockers. So hopefully the Ambush can get healthy soon and get back on track and get back to their form that they had earlier on in the month. And lastly, both SLU men's and women's soccer picked up wins over local opponents on Saturday this past weekend. The men's team beat McKendree 2-1 behind 2 goals from Chase Neese, while the women's team got 4 unanswered goals from 4 different goal scorers and a 4-1 win over UMKC. Both teams will be on the road this weekend with some pretty important matchups before returning home next week. Of course, SLU's men's soccer team will be coming home to play rivals SIUE for the Bronze Boot next Wednesday. Well, speaking of SLU, Bill McDermott is obviously familiar with that school and is also familiar with the rivalry between them and SIUE. I talked to him earlier this week about what that rivalry means to him, as well as a couple of other topics in international soccer. Hope you enjoy. Well, I'm excited to welcome back to the show someone who has been a big part of St. Louis soccer's history and its culture, as well as having a legendary broadcasting career. Mr. Soccer, Bill McDermott, thanks for coming back on the show with me.
Josh, anytime. How you been?
I've been doing good, Bill. I mean, obviously the weather has has turned a little bit for the worse around.
Yeah.
Snow on the ground, of course, but still, as you know, the soccer does not stop around the world. So it's
No.
we're still going through the seasons. We're getting through it. We're fighting through the pandemic, and there's still a lot to talk about. Which, of course, brings me to my first topic. I wanted to have you on to talk about a couple of different things going on. But first, of course, is on the international stage. Champions League returns next week. Seen some updates on some matches changing venues to neutral sites that will make things interesting. But of course, it's still the biggest tournament in the world, club tournament in the world.
Yes.
And there are a lot of really cool, interesting matchups. Wanted to get your thoughts on what you're looking forward to starting next week.
Yeah, well, as you just pointed out, Josh, it is the biggest club tournament in the world. And what I'm looking forward to is simply some more quality soccer. We start off with Paris Saint-Germain at Barcelona. Now, how's that for your first game? Next Tuesday, you mentioned competition begins next Tuesday. Paris Saint-Germain at Barcelona. Liverpool's at Leipzig. Liverpool, however, is not going to be allowed to travel into Germany. You just talked about that, but that's going to be the case in a couple other games and different venues and different competitions. But because of the new strain that has become more prevalent in London, these teams are not being allowed to travel to other parts of the world. So we'll soon find out about that. Then on Wednesday, the 17th, Juventus is at Porto. And Christian Vieri, a former Italian international, has already said, when you play against Juventus, anywhere, you're already down 1-0 because of Ronaldo. I don't know if you saw the most recent game, Josh, in the Coppa Italia between Juventus and Inter Milan. The guy, he's just nonstop. Does he still have the breakaway speed he had with Manchester United? Well, of course not. But it doesn't border far from that. He runs at people. He's actively involved in the penalty area. He's a great passer of the ball. He finds people, and he's doing that on a more frequent basis now as well, finding people in dangerous positions. And in the air, he is absolutely magnificent. And on dead balls as well, he's still, and how many times have we talked about this, Josh? He's still, along with Lionel Messi, two best players in the world. And aren't we fortunate to be able to watch these two play in their absolute prime, which has been more than a decade for all intents and purposes at this high of a level, these two players. So Juventus is at Porto. Borussia Dortmund is at Sevilla. Now, what I'm looking forward to with Borussia Dortmund is continuing to watch, the consummate number 9 shirt around the world now, Erling Haaland. And Josh, he's only 20. He is only 20. Big, strong, mobile, good on the ball, inside the penalty area, obviously, gets on everything, comes back a little deeper to help find the game, joins up with midfielders. But I think that Norway may have an opportunity to do some things internationally, not just because of him, but also Martin Odegaard, who will now see more action now that he's on loan to Arsenal. So I hope that he sees more action because he was bred by Real Madrid and then loaned most recently to Arsenal. So between these two, Norway really has a golden generation, if you will, of players, starting with just those two. Who else is going to come along to combine with them? We'll wait and see. Then on Tuesday, the 23rd, Chelsea's at Atletico Madrid, and Bayern, the holders, who still look extremely strong. Extremely strong. Even with the loss of Thiago, who was magnificent for them, going to Liverpool, more on him later with relation to his work at Liverpool lately. But Bayern's at Lazio, but Bayern looks awfully powerful. And like Real Madrid in this competition, Josh, a tremendous amount of pedigree, top international players dating all the way back to their golden age when Bayern Munich and Germany's national team was the best national team in the world in the early 72, then at the 74 World Cup. And then to conclude the games in that first round, the round of 16, Real Madrid is at Atalanta, and Manchester City's at Borussia Mönchengladbach. So, as usual, the usual suspects. It doesn't vary too widely, Josh, but And answer to your question, yeah, I'm just looking forward to watching more quality soccer between top international club teams.
Yeah, there's a lot of great matchups on the docket, like you said, starting with Barcelona, PSG. I think the speculation of will Messi leave Barcelona at the end of the season? Is PSG one of those suitors? It just adds a little bit to that matchup. Another one that you mentioned that'll be at the end of the schedule, Atalanta versus Real Madrid, kind of reminds me of a similar matchup that Madrid had a couple seasons ago versus Ajax. You know, a free-flowing offensive team that doesn't have a lot of superstars, but a lot of young players that they've developed. They play a very aggressive style. I'll be interested to see how Madrid tack that this time around. They've got some injuries that they have to deal with. They're not at full strength. We'll have to see about that. And also, again, the English clubs, how will they handle playing at neutral sites, playing against a couple of good offensive teams? Leipzig, Mönchengladbach are really good goal-scoring teams. We'll have to see how those teams handle it. But again, like you said, a lot of top soccer to get to, and thankfully we're going to get to it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the Real Madrid as one of the teams to watch. They're always one of the teams to watch in any type of competition, but in particular in the Champions League, or as it used to be called when it first started, the European Cup, dating back to Hento and Puskás and Alfredo Di Stefano. They were absolutely magnificent. And when you make a tour of the Bernabeu, you see all the trophies from the Champions League and La Liga Championship, things of that nature. But their current team, still with some of the old standbys with Kroos and Modric, and I love Josh, their left back, Ferland Mendy, the young French back. You talk about a wide back who attacks. He is really a joy to watch. Very similar to Alphonso Davies, who is the left back for Bayern Munich, who, if there's anybody faster right now playing, especially at that position, I have not seen. Ferland Mendy is quick. But no comparison to Alphonso Davies. And Davies was listed in the first 11 from the UEFA.com, the fans pick in the first 11 for the players of the year last year. So Alphonso Davies being a Canadian international, now playing for Bayern Munich. We'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about the national team, Josh. But we're seeing players from North America now playing literally all over the world, and in the process at very, very top clubs around the world.
Well, could you speak a little bit further on that, Bill? Because this past transfer window, I've talked about it on a couple of shows I've been a part of, we saw a large group of either American-based players or MLS-based players make the jump to European clubs via loan or in some cases permanent deals. And that, of course, goes to the momentum of the Americans, like we talked about previously, being successful at the top European clubs. I believe the number now is over 50 American-based players playing at European clubs. I mean, what, in terms of that trend going forward, not just the success, but seeing guys make moves, you know, to like, say, Jordan Morris playing for Swansea City in the championship, and some of these other players. Talk a little bit about that trend going forward, how positive that is for MLS.
And that's the proper word, Josh, the trend. That is positively what's happening now. Mike Sorber, who we all know, the assistant coach for LAFC with Bob Bradley, former national team coach, has always said it's great that American players are going overseas to play top competition internationally. But what we have to see is some Americans get into the absolute real top clubs so they can play in the Champions League. Well, Mike Sorber's got his wish. I mean, you take a look at the potential, emphasis on potential. I'm guessing at the first 11 for the national team, as they get busy going in all kind of busy year for them after what transpired last year, obviously. But up front with Christian Pulisic, Tim Weah, and Yunus Musa, who, by the way, still hasn't played 4 full internationals at the senior level for the United States. So he still has to make up his mind whether they'll play for the United States, Italy, Ghana, or England. What a choice for a young man. At midfield, the attacking midfielder, probably, Gio Reyna, playing for Borussia Dortmund, Tyler Adams or Red Bull Leipzig. And how about this guy, Josh? We first saw him playing at the soccer park, Worldwide Technology Soccer Park, playing for the Red Bulls in the USL Championship. And I remember distinctly Al Trost, former great in the NASL for the St. Louis Stars, soccer royalty in St. Louis, saying, this guy has a definite future with the national team. Well, Al, obviously, knowing what he's talking about, called that shot. And then Weston McKennie playing with Juventus. So that translates on a daily basis. He's playing with Bernardeschi, Paul Dybala, Ronaldo, and on a daily basis, he's training with these players. Similar to what happens in the backfield. Anthony Robinson, again, these are all just potentials. Anthony Robinson maybe at left back, the two center backs. Well, I think this one's a definite. I think John Brooks from Wolfsburg is a definite center back, probably left center back. Chris Richards, just on loan to Hoffenheim from Bayern Munich. And then Serginho Dest, who we saw get just his second cap against Uruguay at Busch Stadium some years ago. He playing for Barcelona, so he's playing on a daily basis. He's training with Lionel Messi. And the goalkeeper who has really changed his style of play, going from Freiburg to the Columbus Crew to Manchester City, then loaned to Fortuna Dusseldorf, then back to Man City, Zach Steffen. So you take a look at that first 11, that potential first 11, Josh, and then the other players, the countless other players from which Greg Berhalter has to choose. He's going to have a real difficult assignment picking the 23 that he uses in the World Cup qualification process, and then hopefully on to Qatar. But we should talk about that because it will be an absolute disaster and failure if this team not only doesn't qualify for the World Cup, but doesn't advance and do some damage in Qatar because of where all these players that Greg's going to have the opportunity to choose from, where they're all playing now on a regular basis. And I emphasize they're in the first 11s for these respective clubs. And Christian Pulisic wears a 10 shirt for Chelsea. So this gives you an idea of the quality and the quantity of American players, as you said, well over 50 now playing overseas.
Yep, and we'll start to see that decision come up here in just a couple of weeks when they take on Northern Ireland. It'll be a busy year and an important year for that men's national team.
Northern Ireland, unfortunately, without George Best. When you go down the list of greatest players never to have participated in a World Cup, George Best is, of course, one of those. George Weah, another one. There's countless other players. But when you think of Northern Ireland, you think of George Best and his absolute halcyon heyday.
Definitely. Bill, I want to get to a topic that a viewer of mine brought up the last time that you were on that they were interested in hearing from you. Obviously, you have a long tenured broadcasting career. You've been at basically, countless and countless of World Cups. You've seen a lot of players, play in action, some of which people would know, some of which either people have forgotten about or never got a chance to actually see in person. Wanted to get a couple guys on a list of some kind from you about players that you got to see in person who many people maybe haven't heard about or haven't gotten a chance to see over the years.
Yeah, these are players like you emphasized, Josh. These are players I've not seen on video or recordings of games or whatever. These are players I've seen live, having done World Cup games, been to World Cups. But we'll start with the 70 World Cup. That was my first World Cup. And everyone obviously talks about Pelé and that being in his last World Cup, and justifiably so. But that team absolutely doesn't work if they don't have Gerson, Tostão, Jairzinho. These three players, in particular Jairzinho, who scored in every round of that particular World Cup, and Gerson and Tostão at midfield really pulled the strings. They, in the process, gave Pelé a lot of liberty, and in particular in that World Cup as well, playing for Italy, Gianni Rivera and Jacinto Facchetti, two famous world-class players. Rivera, a forward / midfielder, elegant on the ball, real class player, many caps for Italy, and Facchetti, a strong defender who, like Brazilian wide backs, made it a habit of getting out of the backfield on a regular basis. I picked a Scottish player, not only played internationally for Scotland, but later years in his life, like a lot of players of that particular era, came over to play in the NASL, Josh. His name was Charlie Cook. And Charlie Cook played for Los Angeles in the NASL. They played against the St. Louis Stars at Francis Field one year. And Pelé has listed him on his all-time 100 top players. He was a joy to watch, up and down on the flank. I later got to know him. I was doing games in NASL. He ended up being the coach of the Memphis Rogues. So Charlie Cook, a Scottish international, was a joy to watch. At the 74 World Cup, like we talked about at the 70 World Cup, people talk about play all the time. 74 World Cup, people talk about Franz Beckenbauer and Johann Cruyff for West Germany and Holland, respectively, for good reason. But Wolfgang Overath, one of the first players that we saw on a regular basis, or at least in person, to be a masterful left-footed player. The left-footed player automatically stands out, and you notice him right away simply because there are not that many. There are much more now, much more prevalent. But Wolfgang Overath for West Germany was magnificent in midfield. Likewise for Holland, alongside of Johan Cruyff, was Johan Neeskens, who later went on to play in NASL with the Cosmos. Hard, rugged tackler. Like I said earlier about providing space and movement for Pelé, for Brazil's team. Neeskens did that for Cruyff. Did a lot of his dirty work in the central part of the field and made it possible for Johan Cruyff to excel for Holland. At that 74 World Cup, I think the truth really be told, Josh, one of the best teams, if not the best team, they lost to West Germany in the semifinal, was Poland. And they were the team from the 70s, due in particular to three main players, I think, the ones I loved watching. Grzegorz Lato, who played in numerous World Cups for Poland. Robert Gadocha, who later came over to play for the Chicago Sting in the NASL. And then Kazimierz Zdejna, who likewise came over to the United States to play for San Diego. These three players, but in particular, Lato for Poland, he was a winger, did nothing but attack, up and back and running at people. And on the other side of the field was Gadocha. They were masterful, and West Germany really got lucky to escape in that semifinal against Poland. So unless you want me to go on, John, those are just a few. We can talk about this at any time and any other topic of the podcast, but those are just a couple, two or three of players that I've seen, other than the absolute top players who always get the recognition. These are some other world-class players as well.
For sure, definitely. I think you could do, each decade, basically.
Yeah,
guys that have through the cracks. But I think it's important, like you mentioned, these are guys that you can't easily go up on YouTube and look up their clips and see them, things like that.
And you know what, Josh, you're 100% right. But you'd be surprised that you call up almost any kind of a game now, you can't find something. Not everybody, like you said, but a team that was really striking and some of their players that were tremendously notable were the Nigerians, who made their debut in the World Cup, at the World Cup in the United States in 1994 with Rashidi Yekini, Finidi George, J.J. Okocha, Daniel Amokachi, and they really, really entertained. They beat some prominent teams in 94, and they showed, likewise, what Cameroon did in 90 when they shocked the world by opening the World Cup to defeat Argentina. Nigeria, Cameroon, those are the teams that really started to put the emphasis on African soccer and are always at the top when it comes to the African Nations Cup, always in the top of that competition.
Most definitely. Bill, I want to get to a couple of St. Louis topics before I let you. First off, recently we heard from St. Louis City sporting director Lutz on a podcast with Grant Wahl, talking a little bit about the project and about how things are going. And something that at least stood out to me was when the topic came up of a head coach type search.
Yes.
Lutz kind of mentioned that ideally or possibly they'd like to have someone in the earlier parts of 2022. And he pointed out, and he said that this, even though, again, he has a European background, he wouldn't limit himself to just a European search in terms of a possible head coach. That there's a lot of talent here in the U.S., and obviously we've seen in MLS, a lot of the successful teams have had coaches with MLS-type experience. I want to get your thoughts on that type of topic, the kind of the debate versus European style and having a coach that is big on the international stage, maybe could bring in players, things like that, or a coach from MLS who knows the league, who's got some experience and can help navigate those particular functions of it.
Good question, Josh, because that's really at the crux of everything with relation to MLS. And I was overjoyed with what Lutz had to say to Grant, because he is not dismissing the idea that, yes, we could indeed have an American coach. and there certainly could be an American coach for St. Louis City SC who has ties to St. Louis. There are countless players now, countless coaches now, who are learning either at the international level or have played in MLS and then have gone on to coach. Two of whom, right immediately off the top of my head, and these are just two, are Mike Sorber and Pat Noonan, logical candidates. So I was really overjoyed with what Lutz had to say. Lutz gets what's going on with relation to St. Louis and the space that it occupies for our sport around the United States. And he is not dismissing the idea that it would indeed be feasible for an American to coach this soccer team. Most recently, Miami made a change, and David Beckham brought in his old pal Neville, so his Manchester United Academy, to be the coach for Inter Miami. But along with that, and on the same day, he hires Chris Henderson to be more or less their sporting director. Now, that gives you the best of both worlds, an international coach who, along with David Beckham, will have ties with the international community. And the sport is, no matter what level you look at it, Josh, the sport is international. Just accept it. Chris Henderson played in MLS and has a distinct feel for how MLS operates differently than around the world. First and foremost, we play on a totally different calendar than the rest of the world, be that as it may. But allocation money, designated players, things of that nature that a coach really would prefer to be preparing his team for an upcoming game. But when you have a sporting director who's familiar with all the intricacies of Major League Soccer, that's a really wise way to go.
Yeah, I think, again, you make the great point of you want those connections. You want the ability to recruit different players and be able to scout and know around the world where to find the best players. But again, like you said, it's just a different game here with MLS, the scheduling, the grind, the players, the amount, the teams and things like that. You got to be able to know the league, and having someone with that type of knowledge too. Obviously, we got the sporting director with a European background. Maybe then we'll have that balance, or at least surrounding the coach, there will be people who know MLS. But I thought it was a good conversation and important to maybe get a little bit of update on the timeline, because we've been wondering about some of those on-field decisions, and just to get a kind of a inside look at what the thought process is.
Yeah, and Josh, as a follow-up, Lutz, ever since he was introduced, the day he was introduced with St. Louis City SC, he has said that he would like to see, when the opening day comes about in 2023, some local players being that final selection, maybe in the first 11. We don't know, but the overall basic makeup of the team is indeed going to be international. That's the way the rest of the league is, and that's the way you have to play. The St. Louis Stars used to field one day fielded a first 11, Josh. They fielded a first 11, all of whom were born and raised in St. Louis. That does not and has never happened in the history of not just soccer, sports, but those days are over. St. Louis is still the birthplace of the sport in our country, but there are likewise everybody else in the United States is playing now. And it is a different animal totally than soccer around the world. So consequently, you need a coach who is well-informed about players around the world who could possibly come here to play, as well as players coming up through your academy system. And that's what Lutz is really keen on. And I really appreciate the effort that he's trying to champion with bringing up young players from St. Louis in and around the St. Louis area, irrespective of what neighborhood you're from, making an all collective process for St. Louisans being on that final selection.
Bill, I want to get you out of here on this. As of right now, the game is still on the schedule. And I say that just because with the pandemic, you never know what's going to happen, especially at the collegiate level. But coming up next week, SLU men's soccer, they've gotten back under the way. They played a couple matches already, but they will take on their rivals SIUE for the Bronze Boot next Wednesday. I can't think of almost any better of a person to have on to talk about this type of match than you. You've been a part of it in your history, obviously, from the very beginning. These two got clubs going up against each other. The fact that we're getting this game again is a huge plus, but talk to me a little bit about what the Bronze Boot means to you and what this match means for St. Louis soccer culture.
Well, I'll tell you, Josh, I played in the very first Bronze Boot game. It wasn't even labeled the Bronze Boot game yet. That was a product of the CYC, Joe Carenza, Bob Gelker. my senior year at St. Louis Shoe down at Musial Field, 1969. We played against SIU Eversville, who, by the way, fielded a first 11 entirely of St. Louis players, as did we at St. Louis University. But over the years, a couple times, SIU was #1 in the country, St. Louis was 2, then it was vice versa. But there will be crowds at Busch Stadium there was one crowd of 20,112 one year to see an intercollegiate soccer game at a professional baseball venue. I mean, that's unheard of. But yeah, we're looking forward to it. Hopefully it happens. Hopefully it transpires. But with everything being so fluid right now, Josh, with the pandemic, the weather, you just don't know. But it's scheduled to be played next Wednesday night, the 17th. The women's teams for the respective schools are playing at 3 o'clock. Men's teams are playing at 7 o'clock.
And just talk a little bit real quick about SLU. They've started the year. They've got some interesting players on that team. I know people from St. Louis FC will remember Patrick Schulte, the goalkeeper.
Yes.
Of course, there's also a young man on that team with some pretty impressive international ties. You've already mentioned his cousin a little earlier on the show, Weah. But talk a little bit about the SLU team.
You're obviously referring to Patrick Weah, the nephew of George Weah. And George Weah, as you mentioned a moment ago, Dwight, about some of your viewers may not be familiar with some of these players I mentioned, but George Weah was the first African-American player to win the Ballon d'Or, which has been the prize keepsake of Lionel Messi and Ronaldo over the last decade. But he's now the president of Liberia, and his nephew, Patrick Weah, is a forward for St. Louis University. And what's unique about him is he gets the ball and goes at the goal. He's very good in the penalty area, gets on everything in the penalty area, and passes the ball well, too. Holds it up nicely. So St. Louis University, both men and women, have both been picked to win their respective championships in the A10 as they play different schools. Not nearly as much travel this year because of what's going on. But they both will get started in the league seasons fairly soon. Not as many games out of the A10 schedule, simply, again, because of the pandemic. But they start off the season 2-0. The women's team are 1-0. The women's team plays Xavier this Friday. And then the St. Louis University men are on the road to play against Marquette this weekend. And then they both return to play at Herman Stadium, hopefully, ideally, weather notwithstanding, next Wednesday night.
Very excited to see those two. Again, glad that they've gotten off starts and that they're playing. And again, that just that rivalry, what it means to St. Louis, and see it continue here, even a pandemic-shortened season is very exciting. Bill, always a pleasure to have you on. Love going through soccer history. Love talking about what's going on currently in the game. And again, hopefully we'll have more conversations like this down the road. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Anytime, Josh. Nice talking to you.
My thanks to Bill for joining me on the show once again. That'll do it for this episode of the Gateway to Soccer Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, don't forget to go check out Atletico TV. We posted another new episode this past Monday. Some very important conversations about some work being done in the St. Louis soccer community. Also, great insight from our coaches, Ricky Garza and Luis Swisher, about some of the problems that Liverpool have been having over the past couple of EPL matches. We won't have a new show next week due to President's Day, so make sure you go and check out this last one, especially for those important conversations. Thank you all for the support you have shown me over the multiple different projects I'm involved with. I will be back here next week with a brand new episode of this show. Have a great weekend.